Hi, everyone. My name is Marlo Angel, and I'm the director of the Free State Festival. We're so honored to have join us today for this Q&A for Reckoning in Boston. We have the director of the film, James Rutenbeck, joining us today, and Kafi Dixon, a producer of the film and also one of the lead participants in the documentary. So hi, James. Hi, Kafi. How are you?
Hello.
Hey, Marla. We're doing really well. Thanks.
Yes.
Fantastic. We're so honored to have you join us. This film is being programmed as part of the Art Center's Ghost of Segregation exhibition programming. So this exhibition, it's a photography exhibit. It takes up 3 galleries at the Lawrence Art Center, and it documents the history or remnants of the architectural history of segregation, racial discrimination across the United States. The exhibition by Richard Frischman. And so we really wanted to provide some contemporary connections from that history and show what's going on with things in the US today that can be related to that history. So this film in particular popped into our feed and just felt like the perfect correlation of contemporary discussion about systemic racism. And we were honored to have this film as part of your engagement tour. So I thought maybe you could begin by telling us a little bit about the engagement tour that you've been on with this film, what it's been like, where the film has been going, and what your goals are for that tour.
Kafi, do you want to take that on? Well, I think that after we finished the film, first of all, Marla, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here. We finished the film, in August of 2020, I think, and both Kafi and I had like big dreams for this, for how the film could be used. We always felt that there were so many points of entry to the film, and that it could be used as kind of a tool and a place for conversations to happen, because a lot of the people who had seen the film seemed moved by it and seemed like they thought that they wanted to do something. And so we thought, well, why don't we take advantage of this? But neither of us had that kind of like expertise, which is very specific kind of expertise. And we just lucked out and met a friend of mine, introduced me to Marga Veria, who is our impact producer, who coordinated this campaign that started on the West Coast, and has been moving eastward. We've partnered with 65 different colleges, universities, social justice organizations, urban planners, sociologists. And I think 8,500 people across the country have seen the film over the last 11 months. So it's more than we ever imagined. And we've had the kind of conversations that we were hoping for. So it's been really gratifying.
Yeah.
And along those lines, if we have anybody that would like to ask a question as part of this engagement, please just drop it into the chat and we will ask it as we're doing our conversation today. We're here in Lawrence, Kansas, and it's a small college town, 100,000 people or so. And this story is so specific to Boston. How can we relate? And how do you think audiences in cities that are in the Midwest or outside of an urban center like Boston can connect to this film and stay engaged with it?
I think that the reason that it was intentional, the strategy of starting in the West Coast and coming back in and being heard around that intention, was that the conversation was not specifically solely a conversation for Boston. It was the documenting and witnessing of what a lot of new communities are going through. Old communities with new residents, new intentions, new investment. Some formed as gentrification and some just urban sprawl. But we wanted to ensure that this documentary is used as a tool for, regardless of communities, regardless of whether they were white or black, white or indigenous, Black or Latinx, that we were encouraging a conversation around what it is to humanize a community that is not necessarily connected to yours, and what it is to understand them, but especially between the relationships of African American and indigenous communities. it's a very specific conversation uh, when we start talking about the founding of this country, right? And not just what is our history, as that sometimes can be a difficult conversation, but how have we ended up here? And do we want to figure out how we have ended up here? And again, that's not just a conversation for Boston, it's a conversation for many communities across the United States.
I think one of the most powerful moments for me is when you're talking to the city and we see those conversations happening in real time, the camera angle, seeing your perspective, seeing the city's reactions and how you counterbalance them so calmly and getting right to the point of the matter. And so I think that's something that we can take away is city engagement and how we involve ourselves in activism in the city. And there were some really striking moments that I felt very emotionally moved by.
Mm.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that was like to experience in real time and what you took away from that.
Yeah, a lot of people. It's funny because I wear these shrouds or these capes that sometimes don't belong to me. I wear sometimes people say, "Oh, you're a movie star," and really silently I'll say to myself, "I'm actually really a terrible introvert." Right? I can go days without seeing people, and I'm fine with it. The reason that agriculture and farming appeals to me is that you can be out walking somewhere with purpose and with intent and not bump into anybody until you need their help or they need your help. Um, so like these things that people think about me, and one of the things is that I'm not an activist per se, as much as I was a person that witnessed something or was experiencing something that I knew inherently was wrong, right? And that was embedded in a perspective that was less than our highest good as people. It was like, "Wait, what are we doing?" Like, this is not how this works. We're supposed to seek out, and philosophy would say, we're supposed to seek out our highest good, especially when, you're a municipality, a town, a city, a state, and your constituency says you're mandated by your constituency to seek the highest good for everybody that's within that city. So, I mean, those meetings were what you saw. I try to remind people what they saw, what that they thought was activism was an agency of frustration.
Mm.
It was purely just there was agency because I did it like James. I never I didn't feel I resented that I had to have that conversation truthfully. I was resentful of it. And I also had a lot of agency because I this project was temporary for me. It really was built out for the community and the women. And I felt that as long as they don't hear us or hear me, I'm s- tethered to this space, this conversation to them when all I was trying to do was move to Vermont. Yeah. So, it was intense and it became frustrating because I was just like, this is not our highest good, but especially for a city, a progressive city at that, this is definitely not our highest good.
And I
I
think,
think
oh, go ahead, James.
no, I was just going to say it's sort of interesting. That I don't think either of us
Yeah.
thought of ourselves as activists, but we somehow ended up in this situation where we had to respond in a way to what we were witnessing, as Coffee says, that sort of turned us into activists, even against our will, in a sense.
Mhm.
I didn't want to be in the film, and I didn't want to. There's so much that I didn't, I just wanted to be an observer. And somewhere in the middle of this, all that changed, and
Mhm.
we both became activists, almost against our better impulse. You
Yeah.
know,
As much as we were trying to just think, they'll give us the land, they'll give like we would comfort each other. Sometimes it was weird. We would comfort each other because it would just got to be to be in that experience and to witness, one of the things in the documentary is you can watch my oppression of me going from this really bubbly person on my way to class. So at the end, after clearing land with a brush cutter and, working all day and shoveling all day, I'm just sitting there exhausted. Like, I've done work for my community, for this community. What has the city done for this community? What does the city owe to this process? How do they engage in it? And the realization of the lie that we are told as an American society about other communities, about pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, and how toxic that is, that we perpetuate this self-determination. And with self-determination, supposedly, and it falls heavy on new Americans a lot of times as well, with some hypothetical self-determination, we'll all be realized and self-actualized and make it to where we want to be. But in this documentary, there's clear that myth or that lie or that facade is dispelled.
And I think there's these beautiful punctuations between just what you're talking about, what the role of a city is. And so we see those great quotes that are read and seen on screen from Socrates or philosophers. And I thought that really put a nice punctuation on those moments.
Yeah.
James, could you talk about that process and why you decided to take that approach in the documentary?
Sure. I mean, I think that, in the Clemente course, the students, it's a rigorous course, and students are expected to, not just spout their opinions in these Socratic conversations. You have to cite text to sort of back up what you're saying. And so I felt like, if that kind of rigor is expected of the students, then I should bring that same rigor to the filmmaking and make connections between the daily lives and experiences of Kafi and Carl and the text that they're processing from class. And so I saw a film called Patterson by Jim Jarmusch, where they used text on screen, and it was about sort of a poet bus driver, Kafi, who and you sort of saw evolutions of his poems on screen. And that was the thing that really inspired me to try this. And then once I started doing it, I just got really excited by it. And then I was looking for moments where, well, how can I do, like, what are the opportunities to do this kind of thing? How can we sort of jump off? Like, when I just first heard Carl talking about that poem by Amiri Baraka, I was just like, I was just blown away. And I just, thought, oh, okay, here's an opportunity to do that. And then Kafi, in her questioning in philosophy class, like, that was a very real sort of urgent kind of inquiry that you were making in that class, right? That was, well, what does this mean? What is justice? And are we feeding our beast, or we're feeding our the best part of ourselves? All those questions were, for you, I think at the time, urgent questions. At least on screen, it came off that way. And so that was another opportunity to play with some of those texts from Socrates. So yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah.
A really fun part of the filmmaking.
I personally loved it. I don't think, oddly enough, I don't think that we ever question our education, or that we're given that in American society, that we're given such a choice with our education. I mean, one of the things that I remind people is that we're still a very young country. A very young country. America is still a very young country. We're still evolving and developing. But over the experiment of America, which it is still in our evolution, we don't question our the either the success or the failures of our educational system, or we don't bring education into a light where education is for self-development and growth outside of an academic setting. So me having a not a positive experience with the education system growing up through elementary, middle school, and high school, to be in a space where I was being treated, as we talked, as an intellectual equal, and there was that discourse and that questioning of values that countries are founded on,
Mhm.
and
Amen.
its flaws and its successes. I wanted to know better. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to participate in that process of better understanding through an educational lens the philosophy of societies and cities.
I found that so effective to have that humanities discourse. And I know that was the original premise of the film, and it
Yeah.
quickly changed gears.
Yeah.
But it was just so wonderful to have that conversation ongoing throughout the film.
Oh,
And
thanks. Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about how the film transitioned and what the original intent was and how it came to be what it is now?
Right. So originally, I thought that my team and I would film for a year in the Clemente classroom. I had just a little bit of money from, I forget where, but it wasn't a lot, but it was enough to hire a crew and film 7 classes over the course of a year. And I thought, well, maybe a film could emerge from this. And then over the course of that year, I got to know Kafi and Carl, and Kafi very generously sort of like welcomed me into her life. And I think you were trying to help me, to educate me in a way, and to wake me up. As I say in the film, like Kafi said a few times, James, I just want to shake you, because there's so many things that you have been that were hidden from me as a white suburban guy, who has this kind of privilege that allowed me not to ever see housing court, or not to ever walk into a welfare agency, or not to I don't know anyone, and I don't know, none of my family members have ever been homeless or evicted, so that all of that was something that I began to see. And at the same time, I was feeling a kinship and friendship with both Kafi and Carl, and seeing these things happen to them. Well, there were 2 steps. One was I realized I wasn't really equipped to tell their stories, Kafi and Carl's stories. And so I brought them on as contractually as producers to work with me, in sort of a collaborative kind of process. But then a couple of years after, it was a total 5-year sort of involvement. Near the end, like the 4th or 5th year, Kafi and some of our other friends, people who had become friends, all urged me to bring my voice into the film. And their reasoning behind that, it was not anything I ever wanted to do or thought I would do in this film at all. It just seemed so inappropriate. But they convinced, I think what they convinced me that, this story was not just their story, it was our story. And so, and that's because we're all living within these systems and structures. We're not, we're all participating in it. And I think that
Mhm.
that was sort of like, they gave me permission to express what I had seen and what I was feeling, which was really liberating for me.
Yeah.
And they helped me figure it out as well. So.
It's really strange. I mean, it's not strange. It's strange. I think I'm thoughtful about how people feel that we're, as Americans, that we're more, that we're less alike than we are alike, and not understand how there's this connectedness that is based in our history, is based in the founding of this country, is based in the Civil War, is based in capitalistic systems, is based in land and agriculture and food and community and what is it to be American.
Yeah.
And that within itself in our history ties us together in ways that I think if we were to sit and actually think about it, we would find that we are more alike, that we although we may come from different classes, different cultures, have different understandings, religions, different values, that we do have a connection towards just wanting the best for ourselves and our families. And the difference between that want being satisfied is based on, sometimes can be as simple as the color of our skin. And to understand that through no fault of our own, through the luck of the draw, how you come into this world, the class you come into, the socioeconomic class, that we fare no better than sometimes caste systems in other countries as far as what the color of your skin, how the color of your skin represents to others your values.
And was communicating that commonality part of your decision to come on as a producer and take a more active role in the filmmaking process itself?
Well, the whole entire, I mean, there were many reasons why I participated in the documentary, and it was not for fanfare. Um, but I wanted there to be a historical touch point of my work. That was probably where a slither of ego entered in. I wanted to know that somebody tried to do this work in Boston, whether it succeeded or failed. But coming in as a producer was there was an intimacy of me understanding that this was challenging for James. As these conversations for all communities around culture and gender and race are difficult. And a lot of times it's very easy to pull away from it and say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to see it. Those people, that has nothing to do with me. These killings have nothing to do with me. Why was that boy out? Why did he have a hoodie on? Why was he running? It wasn't cold. Why were they down there protesting? What was that about? It's very easy to say, that's not my value. That's not what I represent. And because I'm shutting myself down, there's no conversation. I'm in this role. And that wasn't even James, as a very kind-hearted human being, wasn't even embedded to that extent. But I noticed that it was difficult for him as a very kind-hearted person to understand and to witness what was essentially violence and the denial of a basic human right, which was the right to feed yourself, the right to gather as community. So I looked at him and I was just like, all right, one, we want to support you in this process because you're carrying the weight of how you would be seen by American society as a white man, as I'm carrying the burden of how I'm seen by society and all that goes into it as a maternal, paternal, African American woman, generational to this country. And in telling both of our stories, James, it had the wherewithal to say, yes, I need you to help me tell this story so that we can all learn about each other more authentically, more thoughtfully. And that as James and I, our relationship evolved, that people could watch that resolution and have hope in the process of what's at the end of doing the deep work of better understanding somebody. And that's a friendship and an understanding.
And it does make the film such a powerful experience. And I know just having that acknowledged and being so upfront about what it is like as a white male to tell this story and to be upfront about it and take it head on and involve yourself in the filmmaking was really powerful to watch. So I'm glad that the story transformed in the way that it did. We have a great comment, a question by Gwen. I'm going to pop back up again on screen. Thank you both so much for sharing this impactful film with us and being here this evening. Are there any updates on the Common Good Co-op? And do you have suggestions about how to create safe spaces?
Agreements. And give it time. When I don't know how to do. For some reason, it just seems like over the last few years, these days just speed by. I mean, it's just like one thing after another, and we've forgotten the importance of giving something time. I think that giving something time has become a lost art of the process of, again, watching something evolve, or participating in the process without dictating how fast or slow it should go. So for creating safe space, I think the most important thing is you have to divest yourself of any real outcome. And that it's hard. It's hard to say that this may not happen. It's hard to say that this may not happen, but with all my hope, I will be here, and I'm committed to this process. It's almost Buddhist in a way. It's meditative in a way to release yourself from the expectation of what other people are willing or not to be willing to do, and to internally work on yourself and see yourself as that safe space first, and allow it to blossom and overflow into everybody you come in contact with, and every space you embody. And that's really the hard work, I promise you. To be nice when you're like, I'm not in the mood for it right now.
Well, I think I'm definitely going to take that with me, the lost art of giving things time, because I think that's really important. And we don't hear that a lot. So I think that's something that'll stay with me past this.
Yeah. And I would just add, Kafi, you should also say that, you've been doing a lot as a co-op.
Our impact is crazy. And here's the deal. What everybody can do, whoever watches this video from now to the end of time, is become a member of the co-op. That's the easiest way to keep updates. Unfortunately, what happened, that this was such a challenging process, difficult, violent, in everything that it was, is that I stepped away during the documentary and advocacy for the women, even though I was bringing them everywhere I went, because they deserve to be there. They deserve to be in those conversations. I don't care if they understood who was in the room or not. Because that conversation had to do with them, and they in equity, they should be there. But I stepped away from them because the process just became so soupy and oppressive that I felt a need to not take the women on that part of the journey with me. I did not know if they had the deep well that my practices and my belief system and my faith had created for me, of giving the process time. And also, I did not want them to see my anger or frustration and to seed back to an oppressive state of mind of this will never happen. So for the last 2 years, I stepped away while developing the space and working with women in small groups. I stepped away from continuing to grow the co-op to do the deeper work around advocacy and policy work. But we've been out here. Last year during the pandemic, we grew hundreds and hundreds, well over 600 pounds of food. There were so many green tomatoes. There's not enough fried tomatoes that we could have in this space. But we slowly but surely, I bring the women back onto land in transition. So what's going on with the co-op? We have a quarter an acre urban farm that sits smack dab in the neighborhood where it's 62% of women, single head of households earning under $40,000 a year or something similar to it. Our community does have a lot of food, but as far as nutrient dense food access, we are not in a space where we have either access to fresh cattle, meat, or beef, but to supermarkets, and sometimes the supermarkets can be adequate, but they're not Whole Foods. And we don't expect the Whole Foods here either, but we expect the ability to be able to gather and grow food together. So we did get the land. We developed the land. I built 42 beds out there, me and the gentleman. We planted the beds. We grow everything from okra to eggplant to every type of tomato, to the point, again, tomatoes haunt me in my dreams. And within a year of getting the land, I took the money that I was saving up for a farm and brought the only house that was abutting the farm, which we fashioned into the co-op. So I live on the second floor with hopes and dreams of transitioning into rural life soon. And on the first floor is a shared space for women where it's not about necessarily being low income or not. It's about needing a space to center and belong. Even if sometimes for the women that's in isolation, they're like, I don't want to be bothered with anybody. I'm just going to school. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I gave one woman a sweater. She was like, I don't want anything from you. And I was like, okay, I'll take my sweater back. And that was in our respite room at that. But even in that space, I said, she has the right. She has the right to ask for that.
I think that's so meaningful to think about the movie and how it tackles all these issues of feminism, food scarcity, institutional racism, and all those areas. So that's really great to hear that update. And it does make me want some fried green tomatoes. Marciana, you have a good quote. In our community, we're trying to talk about the residue of colonialism. How can we include consideration of Indigenous people in your story, particularly the need to connect to land and land ownership? That's a great question.
Yeah. When I bring up Indigenous communities, I bring them up because there needs to be an understanding of our connectedness. And I think in these very conservative conversations, we don't think about the oppression of Indigenous communities. During the pandemic, I had to take a second job. And luckily it was with the census, leaning into my belief system. And, they called and asked if I was willing to go to New Mexico and do the census. And everybody said, no, they have people going to Florida. Girl, wait to go to Florida. And I was just like, I want to I want to do the service for our Indigenous brothers and sisters to make sure they're counted. Even if they don't know who I am or why I'm flying across the country or why I'm in this hotel and why I have these, whatever it is, this is my servants and humility to that community, which has experienced some of the same violence, if not worse, than as African-American communities and Chicano communities on the West Coast. I do believe in freeing the land. I do believe in reconciliation around conversations around not just climate change, but environmental violence that keeps so many of our Indigenous brothers and sisters living in spaces or living in spaces that do not have do not flourish in the way that other spaces flourish, right? Or may be oppressive to the land or to their bodies or to their being, and their denial of access to spaces where they do flourish, right? We're serving and healing to them in their spirituality and understanding of who they are to this land. So I am a believer in free the land. I believe there's enough land to free it. And I believe that land is as a human right. I also an encouragement of that, understand that we're participating in a political system, and collectively we have to get on board and keep our eyes on the prize of assuring that we have policymakers, that we're at every single vote, to have policymakers that are furthering our intention around humanization and well-being, that are not divisive, but that bring coalitions together collaboratively. There's enough room for all of us. So that's how food, I mean, indigenous foodways, if you think about it, the very problematic understanding of indigenous foodways is it's saved the pilgrims here in New England. We don't want to talk about that
We had
upon Thanksgiving.
last night we had a conversation with the city of San Jose, California,
Mm-hmm.
and they brought us in because they've over the last couple of years been doing an assessment of their housing policies historically,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at redlining and looking at just looking at discrimination in the history and how the city has operated over the years. And it's part of the Department of Justice in California is, I guess, encouraging. I think that's what they said. Every city in California to take this on, and it seemed to me that San Jose was doing this in a very intentional, focused way. Like we were really, really impressed by them and what they were telling us, because it's like, well, I wish, we were thinking, I wish this could happen. This should happen. We know it should happen in Boston, but
Mm-hmm.
it's actually happening in California cities. And so I think that was one of the sort of encouraging things we've heard over the last year in terms of
how it's being done. I'm thinking of one time that I was in Ohio and at a farming conference, and I was sitting next to some guys who were big buff guys drinking their Sprites. They looked like they could have been my uncles or my brothers. And I remember there was a man who clearly was wearing his indigenous clothing, who was speaking. And then he looked to the end of the room, to the table where I was at, and he was saying, to my Choctaw brothers in the back, I'm glad to see you here and to be with you. And I looked around like, who's he talking to? And all the guys that were sitting at the table, acknowledged him. And he said, he's talking to us. I said, why is he talking to you? He said, we're Native American. And that expanded my view again of how we are all connected, regardless of how we see it. So to have a city like San Jose saying we are mandated, thankfully mandated, to do this work and take these considerations in, it's a realization again of how we can all be present to this work collectively to bring about a healing that I think will create a bridge across the divide that it seems to be just ever more so growing in our country and becoming more and more visibly violent with the ability of social media to capture these interactions.
I think those are some important lessons to take even here in Lawrence. I think in terms of some of our city policies that could really take benefit from what's going on around the country, places like San Jose and this amazing example of the co-op.
Yeah. I believe in co-ops. If you guys want to talk more about co-ops, make sure to find me. It's not that hard. You can find me on The Reckoning, commongoodcoop.com, commongoodcooperatives.com, commongoodfarmer@gmail.com, singular. These are very important conversations, and it was almost surreal because usually on a call I always acknowledge the work that we're doing going forward, and that involves how I think about segregation, how I think about African American communities and indigenous communities when we're put someplace. And why do we have to be put someplace or kicked out of someplace or relegated to someplace, right? And the oppressive violence behind that, and why can't we just leave? So you would have, I don't know if you knew of this, Marlo, the way that I flirt around with segregation and thinking about what does safe space look like for Black women or in their families and their spouses, or just women in general, and do we have to take that space? Do we have to advocate for that space? Do we have to curate that space? And who is invited into that space? And as someone was saying to me today, Soma, a revisioning of a founding of our country. and the consideration of a young country, and can we revision a new founding that is more equitable and less violent?
I think those are some amazing questions. I think some of the conversations that have gone up with this exhibition, you know, for example, we had a neighborhood called Liarda, and Mexican railroad workers were housed there from the 20s to the 50s. And so recently there's been some inroads to try to get the city to recognize that space and to preserve that space. And so those conversations are happening. So I think of the conversation we've had today and how that might influence, you know, active steps I might be able to take with the city in recognition of that, because I think that's so important.
And in honoring that, someone once explained, Ben Burkett of Federation of Southern Cooperatives told me, was recounting something in history that I should know about. There's something he was saying, and I'm not going to say this right. I'm sorry, it's coming off the top of my head, about a monument that was donated to First Nation Indigenous communities here in America from Ireland or Scotland. Do you remember, James?
No.
Well, it had something to do with the potato famine, and that even as there was the violence was being enacted on Indigenous communities, the starvation, the displacement, they pulled their money together and donated to the cause of, I believe, the Irish people who were going through a potato famine at the time.
Oh my God.
And they never forgot about it. I think it might be recently, that they donated a monument and some money to those communities who were impacted by COVID, in acknowledgement that they were helped many, many years ago. This is a history of United States, of our connectedness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of our connectedness and how expansive it is. And that was just a reminder of that we do need to be able to humanize each other and understand the history of this country, the bad and especially the good, to continue to inform us of how these communities are impactful on our cities and town, or have historically been impacted, and how to hold them in acknowledgement for that.
That's a beautiful connection. James, how can we stay updated about the film and where it's going from here? And how can people here in Lawrence spread the word to our community and those beyond our community to see the film and get engaged with it?
Yeah, Marlo, sure. Well, our website, reckoninginboston.com, has a screenings page, so you can see where upcoming screenings are. You can tell your friends. You can join us on social media. If you're part of an organization that might feel could benefit from a partnership with us, you can find out how to do that on the website as well. And then our really big news is that we're airing on the PBS series Independent Lens on January 17th. Yes. So we're really excited about that. And the film will be streaming on the Independent Lens site or PBS site for 30 days following that. It'll be a free streaming experience. And I think that these conversations will continue even after the broadcast. So just keep in touch with us through the website.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll be to a point that we can actually come to your community. And I saying to James, he thinks he's going, I say I'm going to disappear in the woods, and James silently thinks he's going to disappear into the woods. So I think we're both lying to each other. I said, James, we're going to continue to have these conversations in other communities. So after the screening, if you deem these conversations important into your community, I am going to express a willingness for James to come and sit within those communities with you, and to continue these conversations, because they're so important, and especially to hear the stories of your community, places like Lawrence.
We would absolutely be honored to have both of you here. We don't expect you to fade into the woods, Kafi, so you're invited.
I promise I'll be in the woods before James is. I just need a full tank of gas. That's it, or an electric car.
As we get ready to close here tonight, I would love to share a poem. Kafi, I just learned that you were a big poetry advocate and audience member. And I thought honoring some of the beautiful text that is throughout this film. We had a great poetry reading, and a poet, Ty Omri Span Ryan, recited a poem of his new book, and it correlated some issues that are present in Lawrence. And so I thought it'd be a beautiful way to close and to make those connections from Boston, from the history of segregation, ghosts throughout America, and to make those local connections really powerful. So before we close, I want to say thank you to you both for honoring us with your presence tonight and sharing this beautiful story with us, because it's going to stay with me for a long time.
Yes, find us, and we'll be glad to sit with you again. Thank you.
A real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone. And
You too.
please bear with the sound in this clip, which is recorded in our gallery, but it's a really beautiful poem.
So this next poem is a little reminder when we think all of these bad things are happening far away on the border or in other countries or down south. SON. September 2014. High school students from Free State vandalized the football field of Lawrence High School before an impending game. What they wrote in shaving cream: School of Niggers. She say she don't need the heartache, don't need to see your words scrawled on her face in the mirror. Say she built for more than forgotten slumlord tours of her body, black and queer, silent and dangerous to touch, so she go for now, but rise like the fire next time. Her eyes cry, but her woke nose ain't nowhere to run if you basic and numb. So she let her heart open when they deny Mike Brown body lay bruised and broken for our sins for 4.5 hours. Blood. Till the rips and tears are a song to freedom from a Babylonian distraction. After that, then flavorless fights and colorblind sights only remind of her mother moon face, micro lashes, and overseer report cards are translated to new trails through that under spirit train. She gonna catch it. And where she's standing gonna be right where you left her in the fields, sprayed with cotton, school of niggers. But where she is flown away. If you want her, then bow your head and admit her juju magic is why the snake ain't bite in the first place. America, descendant of slaves, where masters ain't free, and states claim John Brown, but he don't claim thee. Turn the light on, see the glorious dark for what it is. The only way to grow your soul is to plant it, ashe. Racism no life give, I hope. The water unleaded for all, amen. Youth, we see you. Our hearts, we see you. Burn the chains we